Hello, my babies. I'm going to be sharing scary stories from the subreddit No Sleep, and my apologies for my microphone being garbage. But I hope you like it. Give the video a thumbs up if you do, and thank you for watching. Number 1. My grandpa, a retired homicide detective, wanted me to share another one of his cases to celebrate Halloween. Apologies for the delay when I posted the last 3 entries. My grandpa was adamant. We spend so much time going over the comments, and it brought him a joy I haven't seen in a long time. His health took a brief turn for the worse in the recent weeks, and he made me promise not to post any more transcripts of our conversations without him being able to sit down with me and watch the comments roll in. I kept that promise. It's not always the people you know, the impossible ones weren't limited to just people back in the late 80s, early 90s maybe. We caught a call. A suspect murder had taken place. Mail had filled up the mailbox. Eventually someone called the police for a wellness check. Some uniforms go to check. Look through the window and see blood on the living room carpet and ceiling. They go in, clear the house. We get called. I remember the phone call. It was the same as the calls for impossible cases. Yeah, Grandpa's name. It's another one. We could always tell how bad our day was going to be by the tone of the voice of whoever called us. It was me and my temporary partner I had, this guy Molly. He'd come over from across the state, but like every detective, he was familiar with the possible ones. Though he said at this last stop they were referred to as the unexplained. Different name, but the same mind-boggling bullshit. Anyways, we pull up to the house and find everyone standing outside it. We get out of the car thinking they're just trying to preserve the scene. But then we see everyone is real on edge, jumping when we shut our doors, staring at the ground, just acting real anxious. We ask them what's going on, but no one will say a word. We go around asking if the house has been cleared, and finally, a uniformed, looked like his first day on the job, nods his head a little bit. Molly and I go into the house, and it looks normal. Just a normal suburban house. There was a stain on the living room carpet, and it was very clearly blood. It was made all the more obvious by the fact that there was blood dripping from the ceiling. You ever seen a ceiling with flood damage, where it looks like dropping a feather on it from the other side is going to make it come crashing down? That's how the spot above the stain was. It was dark red and looked thin as wet tissue, so obviously we think there must be a body upstairs. Based on the call we got and how the folks outside were acting, we were expecting something real, something real gruesome. We go upstairs, figure out which room the stain is below, but when we walk in, there's nothing. Room is normal. Not 2 seconds after we open the door, that's when we first hear it. Tap, 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 tap. The best way I can describe it is like they tapped their pinky. Then a half a second later, their ring finger. Then middle index thumb. Boom, 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 real fast. Molly and I both spin around. It sounded like someone was tapping on the wall in the room across from the hall from the one we were in. Now, the door to the room is closed. We've been informed that this woman lived by herself. Didn't have any kids, no husband, not even a family that lived in the state. So there shouldn't be anyone else in there. Molly and I draw our weapons, start doing the whole open the door, show your hands, yada 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 thing. But no one responds. We stand there long enough. I was pointing at the door. Molly had his trained at the wall. We stand there long enough and don't hear anything back that we start wondering if we just heard something from outside or something. The units would have cleared the house, and they'd never done us wrong before. But with how weird they were acting, we wanted to be sure. Just as I started to take a step to pass Molly, move toward the other room, we hear it again. Tap, 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 tap. Only this time it sounded like it was in the room on the other side of the wall from the one we were in. You know, on the same side of the hall, just a door down. I yell out, "Police, step out into the hallway with your hands up." And again, no one responds. Tap, 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 tap. This one comes from the opposite wall from the previous one, which would put whoever was doing it on the steps leading upstairs. Molly was still standing in the doorway, so he took a step and leaned over to take a look, then looked over at me and shook his head. There wasn't anyone there. The next set of taps, that same pattern, they came from above us, like in the attic, then higher up on the wall by the stairs, then down the hall, then from under my feet like someone was tapping on the ceiling from under the living room, then back on the wall on the opposite side of the room, over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Sounded like a miniature stampede was happening all around us. It lasted about 30 seconds. Then as quickly as it started, it had just stopped. Molly and I stood there for a good 10 minutes, guns up, arms arching, wondering what was going on. When we both finally calmed down enough to act rationally, we went through and cleared the house again. Attic, top floor, ground floor, basement. We did it ourselves just to make sure it got done thoroughly. And there was no one. House was empty except for us. So then we have to deal with the fact that the ceiling in the living room is leaking blood. But there doesn't seem to be a source. The bedroom where the leak should have been, where the body should have been, there was a throw rug in there, you know, over the hardwood floor. So we moved the rug. There's a little, door type thing, I guess you could call it. A little door in the floor. Maybe the size of a pack of cigarettes, with the hinge that flushes with the floor. I open it, shine a flashlight in, but there's nothing there. No source of where the blood could be coming from. And even after we had some guys come and take out the floorboards, I took out the insulation and it was dry. The material that made up the ceiling, while it was soaked with blood on the bottom of it, it was completely dry on top. Which, I mean, that's impossible. It's like the source of blood was in between a half-inch thick piece of plaster. That was a hell of a day, I'll tell you. It's so late now, probably 2:30 in the morning. Molly and I are still at the house looking around. We finally get a few people to come in, you know, fingerprint folks, photographs, they're getting their jobs done. Me and Molly are standing in the kitchen when he goes, "Did you hear that?" I hadn't heard a thing. He goes, "There it is again." I'm straining my ears trying to hear what he's hearing. And when I turn to look at him and ask him what he thinks he's hearing, I won't lie to you, my heart skipped a beat. Molly was standing there staring straight ahead into my eyes, but it was like he was looking through me. His face had gone completely limp, slack, and his eyes, they looked like they had been turned off. Like there was no life behind them. His mouth had hung open like he was just totally brain dead. "Molly," I said. "Molly." He just stared through me to the point that I looked over my shoulder to make sure no one was behind me. When I turned my back around, Molly was pointing to the basement door. I looked over and saw that it was closed. When I looked back again, Molly was pointing, but the life had returned to his face. He looked normal. I asked Molly what the heck had happened, and he just said, "You didn't hear that?" I told him I hadn't. He said, "We need to check the basement again." We head over and open the door, only now the lights wouldn't turn on. They worked fine the entire day, but all of a sudden now, nothing. We get our flashlights out and head down. I asked him why we were checking the basement again, but he just kept saying, "We need to check the basement again." "You didn't hear that?" We need to check the basement down there. We get down there, and everything looks the same as it had all day. Tap, 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 tap. The taps sounded like they were against one of the metal racks that lined the basement walls. We shine our lights around. There's nothing. No one. Tap, 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 tap. This time it sounds like it's on a cardboard box. You didn't hear that? Molly says again. The tapping starts all around us. It's on metal, cardboard, plastic, wood, drywall, plaster. It gets to the point to where it's deafening. I shine my light around, and eventually it lands on Molly, who had at some point moved to the corner. He had that same dead look on his face, and he was pointing toward the ceiling just behind me. I consider myself something a brave man, but at that moment, I was about as scared as I could have been. I did not want to look behind me. It felt like something was there, looking at me, waiting for me to turn around. You didn't hear that? Molly said again. You didn't hear that? You didn't hear that? You didn't hear that? You didn't hear that? He just kept repeating it over and over and over. Then he started slurring his words like he'd sound if he were drunk. I'm yelling at him, shut his mouth, scared out of my mind. And so there's already been a lot of this that makes you scratch your head. You know, say, what the hell? But then I can tell my grandpa is reliving this in his head. I worked up enough courage to turn around. Then Molly was still repeating that over and over. But I turned around and looked up toward where he was pointing, and there was a spot of plaster in the basement ceiling that was newer than the rest of it. The same size as the little door in the floor on the second level. We'd been through the house more times than I can remember. Neither of us had noticed the door until now, which seemed unlikely. The tapping seems to be getting louder, faster. I got Molly yelling over and over, and I'm so afraid. I think I might myself. It gets so loud that I cover my ears, start hunching over. I mean, it sounded like you could have heard it from the other side of the neighborhood. Then it all stopped again. I looked over at Molly and saw him sobbing into his hands. Then he walked up the basement stairs without saying a word. But at the time, I didn't want to skip out on my duties. I yelled upstairs for a few of the construction guys to come down and take down the entire piece of plaster that spot was on. They unscrewed the screws, and one side of the piece that was lower than the others. A little bag slides out and falls to the ground. The bag had fingers in it. 3 fingers. If I remember right, it was an index ring and a pinky finger. We eventually went back upstairs, and when we did, there were spots like the one in the basement all over the place. The ceiling in the living room had stopped bleeding, but now we had more of these spots. Must have been 5 or 6 on each level of the house. Inside each of the bags were fingers, from pinky to thumb. We had them all tested, and far as we could tell, at least some of them belonged to the previous owners of the house, going back decades. Turns out that everyone who had lived in this house had died. One of them was a suicide, but the rest were natural causes. It was odd, because all the fingers were in perfect condition, like they had just been moved from the body, and decomp hadn't started yet. Doesn't make any sense. Molly, that poor he quit the job the following day, refused to talk about what was going on in his head during that day. He tried to commit suicide twice that I know of. Now he lives with his daughter in Monterey, California. In the few years after that day, I tried to check in on him from time to time, and he would apparently have these fits where he just screams, "You don't hear that," over and over. I was supposed to go back to the house a few days later. I showed up, and when I got to the front door, I just couldn't do it. The fear set in again. Made me feel like I was going to pass out. I knew right from the jump this one didn't have an answer. I still did my due diligence. Did what I could to find some answers, but I refused to go back into that house. Oh, A neighbor down the street had seen her walking the morning we got the call, so several days after she stopped getting her mail for whatever reason, even though she was apparently home. She'd walked down the street into the main road. We'd tracked her security tapes, but she turned the corner from North Ave on 92nd Street and just vanished. Poof, into thin air. Wondered for a long time what happened to her. Then one day, almost 7 years later, we get a tape in the mail. It had been sent to the precinct, addressed to both me and Molly. It was a security tape from the gas station. The timestamp was the day after we'd both been to her house, so the day after she had vanished. About 2 hours after, across the street from the gas station, some folks were doing some tree work. That woman had walked up to the area these folks were doing the work, set her purse down with her ID on top of it, leaned forward, and went head first into the wood chipper. Messed up, right? Even more messed up than that, the tape came from a gas station in Florida, about 1,200 miles away. This next story is about a skinwalker, and it comes from Paulo R. on Reddit. I was sitting in my car looking through the sunroof, open, and everything went dead quiet. A pack of wild boars ran past around my car, dead silent, and across from the street, from up the hill where there was a huge bear. All of a sudden this bear stood up and walked like a human, toward my car. The bear had antlers. Its face wasn't right, and I was trying not to breathe or move. It was less than a foot away from my driver's side mirror and over 9 feet tall. It was sniffing the air. I could see clearly through my SUV sunroof. There were 2 other cars there to witness this. I don't know what it was, but it finally turned around and walked back up the hill. After about an hour of not breathing and staying still, I got out of my car to check on the couple in a little white car about 3 spots away from me. At this point, a breeze hit me. I had peed my pants. The car next to me, they were both crying. He still had his hand over her mouth, and all he could say was, "That wasn't a bear." No kidding. It was scary.